Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen by Lili uokalani, narrated by Emily Wu Zeller. Introduction by Glenn Grant. If a big wave comes in, large fishes will come from the dark ocean which you never saw before, and when they see the small fishes they will eat them up. Such also is the case with large animals. They will prey on the smaller ones. The ships of the white men have come, and smart people have arrived from the great countries which you have never seen before. They know our people are few in number and living in a small country. They will eat us up. Such has always been the case with large countries. The small ones have been gobbled up. David Malo. Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen is an account by a native Hawaiian of the difficult years at the end of the 19th century, when David Malo's 1837 prophecy of the small being gobbled up by the large came true for the Hawaiian Islands. Malo, one of Hawaii's first native historians to write about Hawaiian antiquities, knew of what he spoke. Born and reared in the days of the first Kamehameha's unification of the islands, Malo had seen the inundation of the island's economic, legal, religious, and social systems by foreign merchants, missionaries, seamen, and whalers. When Lord George Paulet caused an international incident in February 1843 by intimidating the Hawaiian monarch Kamehameha III into acquiescing to British rule, Malo was serving in the kingdom's first House of Representatives. Although Admiral Sir Richard Thomas restored rule to the Hawaiian monarch on July 31, 1843, illustrating that the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness, the fragility of native sovereignty against what Malo called the white tide was vividly apparent. During her tumultuous reign, Queen Lili uokalani would come to know the full force of that white tide. Hawaii's last reigning monarch was born Lydia Kamakaʻeha on September 2, 1838, 1 year after Malo made his dire prophecy. As a royal child, Lydia enjoyed with her siblings the benefits of her ali'i, or chiefly status. She attended the chief's children's school, the present-day Royal School in Honolulu, where the future rulers of the islands were given a Western education by the missionary teachers Amos Starr and Juliet Montague Cook. It was during her school days, often characterized by cultural conflicts between teachers and students, that she first experienced the many incompatibilities of Polynesian and Western values that would one day undermine her throne. These cultural differences became painfully apparent in the Queen's personal life following her marriage on September 16, 1862, to John Owen Dominus, the son of the late Captain John Dominus and his widow Mary. The newlyweds moved into the Dominus home, Washington Place, built between 1842 and 1846 on Beretania Street in Honolulu. The widow Dominus resented the new bride, and despite Lydia's royal lineage, disapproved of the interracial marriage. For over 20 years, Lydia Dominus quietly suffered the hostility of her mother-in-law, seeking solace in frequent visits among her people, lengthy stays on her Waikiki lands, and in her music. It was perhaps only in her music that Polynesian and foreign influences found a happy harmony. An accomplished musician since her youth, Lili uokalani learned to play the piano, organ, ukulele, guitar, and zither, her favorite instrument. She became director of the Kauaiahau Church Choir in 1866, the same year she composed Hawaii's national anthem. Her other compositions include Naina Pua, Ku'upua Ibawa Kalani, Queen's Jubilee, Ho'oheno Song, and her most celebrated song, Aloha Oe, composed as a love song following a trip to windward Oahu in 1878. Her music would serve as an important source of personal solace as political difficulties in the Hawaiian kingdom intensified. When her brother David Kalakaua was elected king in 1874, Hawaiian sovereignty was being challenged on several fronts. A powerful class of American sugar planters and businessmen, some of whom were descendants of Protestant missionaries, had acquired land, money, and influence well beyond their proportionate numbers. The prerogatives of the Hawaiian monarch, which 50 years earlier had been absolute under Kamehameha I, had been greatly curtailed by a Western constitutional system of government. Most tragically, the Hawaiian race had dwindled in size from hundreds of thousands in 1778 to 44,000 by 1880. Hawaiians were becoming a minority in their own island home. To reverse this trend and preserve the sovereignty of the Hawaiian monarch, Kalakaua launched a highly controversial political campaign that promoted native Hawaiian nationalism, thereby galvanizing opposition from the influential American businessmen residing in the kingdom. This confrontation culminated in the turbulent year of 1887, when the king's royal prerogatives and the electoral rights of the native population were greatly curtailed by the despised bayonet constitution. When Lili uokalani ascended the throne following the death of her brother in February 1891, she continued the struggle to promote native sovereignty. Not willing to acquiesce to the clique of economic leaders who had extended their control over Hawaii's political decision-making, Lili uokalani boldly sought to establish a new constitution that would rightly restore the monarchical authority and native Hawaiian voting privileges revoked in 1887. The stage was now set for the series of events described in this book that explain from the Queen's perspective her abdication on January 17, 1883, and imprisonment for treason against the Republic of Hawaii in 1895. For decades, the Revolution of 1893 and the subsequent annexation of Hawaii in 1898 were justified as unfortunate consequences of historical evolution. In an introduction to an earlier reprint of Hawaii's story by Hawaii's Queen, the final days of the monarchy in 1893 were described as being inevitably and inexorably swept along toward democracy. The Queen's 1898 account of the downfall of the Hawaiian monarchy was especially moving because a Hawaiian kingdom was a political and practical impossibility in a world where small entities could no longer prevail against or compete with the ever-growing great powers. History is inevitable only in the apologia of winners. In viewing this controversial period of Hawaiian politics as the sweep of time or the progress of democracy, the deeper moral and legal issues are obscured by rhetoric. Whatever the actions of the Hawaiian monarchs, whatever the validity of the charges of irresponsibility or ineptitude made against them by Americans with vested interests in the islands, it was the prerogative of native Hawaiians to determine their form of government. The democracy introduced by the 1893 provisional government far from represented the will of Hawaiians, Asians, and Europeans, who comprised the majority of the population. The annexationist machinations of U.S. Minister John Stevens and the impact of the Marines landed by the USS Boston on January 15, 1893, were not inevitable political and military actions. When this book was first published in 1898, it was intended as a plea for justice. Just as Admiral Thomas had restored Hawaiian sovereignty in 1843 following an illegal action by Lord Paulet, Lili uokalani prayed that the American nation would act justly and similarly reestablish the Hawaiian throne. O honest Americans, as Christians, hear me for my downtrodden people. Their form of government is as dear to them as yours is precious to you. Quite as warmly as you love your country, so they love theirs. With all your goodly possessions, covering a territory so immense that there yet remain parts unexplored, possessing islands that, although new at hand, had to be neutral ground in time of war, do not covet the little vineyard of Naboth's, so far from your shores, lest the punishment of Ahab fall upon you, if not in your day, in that of your children. For be not deceived, God is not mocked. The people to whom your fathers told of the living God, and taught to call Father, and whom the sons now seek to despoil and destroy, are crying aloud to him in their time of trouble. And he will keep his promise, and will listen to the voices of his Hawaiian children lamenting for their homes. Queen Lili uokalani died on November 11, 1917, her poignant plea for justice unanswered. 70 years later, her people still wait. The struggle for Hawaiian sovereignty has not been dismissed as impractical or impossible, and many native Hawaiians today are aware that the tragic events of 1893 demand a truthful and rigorous reassessment. The Hawaiian language and culture, suppressed after American annexation, are being revived to restore Hawaiian pride and acceptance. Most critically, a widespread consensus is being sought among Hawaiians and non-Hawaiians on how to best define Hawaiian sovereignty within the confines of modern Hawaii. The effort to create an independent land base for the Hawaiian people strengthening their self-autonomy promises to be the most important political movement in the islands as the 21st century approaches. That Hawaii has the only royal palace on United States soil is a fact often pointed out to visitors by residents, conjuring up nostalgic images of kings, queens, and royal balls. It may be more accurate to inform people that Hawaii is the only state that was once a completely independent nation, ruled by an internationally recognized lineage of monarchs who resided in a royal palace that was seized and stripped by a small group of Americans with the assistance of the United States government. That story is best told in Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen, an eloquent testament of the inviolable right of even the smallest nation to determine its own destiny in accordance with the sovereign principles of justice. Hawaii's Story. Chapter 1. A Sketch of My Childhood. The extinct crater or mountain which forms the background to the city of Honolulu is known as the Punch Bowl. At its base is situated the Queen's Hospital, so named because of the great interest taken in its erection by Emma, the Queen of Kamehameha IV. Funds for the cause were solicited by the reigning sovereigns in person, and the hospital building was completed in 1860. Very near to its site, on September 2, 1838, I was born. My father's name was Kapa'akea, and my mother was Keohokalole. The latter was one of the 15 counselors of the king Kamehameha III, who in 1840 gave the first written constitution to the Hawaiian people. My great-grandfather, Keawe'aheulu, the founder of the dynasty of the Kamehamehas, and Keoua, father of Kamehameha I, were own cousins. He was also brother of Mrs. Bishop's ancestress, Hakau, and my great-grand-aunt was the celebrated Queen Kapi'olani, one of the first converts to Christianity. She plucked the sacred berries from the borders of the volcano, descended to the boiling lava, and there, while singing Christian hymns, threw them into the lake of fire. This was the act which broke forever the power of Pele, the fire goddess, over the hearts of her people. It has often happened in the history of nations that the most eminent men have won the crown, and then, instead of ascending the throne, have placed the executive office in the hands of another. Kamehameha I was indeed the founder of Hawaiian unity, and worthy of the surname of the Great. But it is truthfully recorded in the early histories of the islands, those written by such men as Mr. Pogue, Mr. Dibble, and others, that he owed his selection for the monarchy to the chiefs from whom the latest reigning family, my own, is descended. This indebtedness was fully recognized during the life of that monarch. Naihe, the husband of Kapi'olani, was the great orator of the king's reign. His father, Keawe'aheulu, was chief counselor to Kamehameha I. While had it not been for the aid of the two chiefs, Ke'eamoku and Kame'eamoku, cousins of the chief counselor, the Hawaiian Islands must have remained for a long time, if not until this day, in a state of anarchy. My grandfather, Aikanaka, had charge of the guns of the fort on Punch Bowl Hill, which had been brought from the larger island of Hawaii, as the chiefs, their families, and followers had settled here from the time of the final battle, when all the forces contending against Kamehameha I were driven over the Pali. For the purpose of enhancing the value of their own mission, it had been at times asserted by foreigners that the abundance of the chief was procured by the poverty of his followers. To any person at all familiar, either by experience or from trustworthy tradition, with the daily life of the Hawaiian people 50 years ago, nothing could be more incorrect than such assumption. The chief whose retainers were in any poverty or want would have felt not only their sufferings, but further his own disgrace. As was then customary with the Hawaiian chiefs, my father was surrounded by hundreds of his own people, all of whom looked to him, and never in vain, for sustenance. He lived in a large grass home surrounded by smaller ones, which were the homes of those that most closely connected with his service. There was food enough and to spare for every one, and this was equally true of all his people, however distant from his personal care. For the chief always appointed some man of ability as his agent or overseer. This officer apportioned the lands to each Hawaiian, and on these allotments were raised the taro, the potatoes, the pigs, and the chickens which constituted the living of the family. Even the forests, which furnished the material from which was made the tapa cloth, were apportioned to the women in like manner. It is true that no one of the common people could mortgage or sell his land, But the wisdom of this limitation is abundantly proved by the homeless condition of the Hawaiians at the present day. Rent, eviction of tenants, as understood in other lands, were unknown, but each retainer of any chief contributed in the productions of his holding to the support of the chief's table. But I was destined to grow up away from the house of my parents. Immediately after my birth I was wrapped in the finest soft tapa cloth and taken to the house of another chief, by whom I was adopted. Ko'onia, my foster mother, was a granddaughter of Kamehameha I, and was married to Paki, also a high chief. Their only daughter, Bernice Pauahi, afterwards Mrs. Charles R. Bishop, was therefore my foster sister. In speaking of our relationship, I have adopted the term customarily used in the English language, but there was no such modification recognized in my native land. I knew no other father or mother than my foster parents, no other sister than Bernice. I used to climb up on the knees of Paki, put my arms around his neck, kiss him, and he caressed me as a father would his child. While on the contrary, when I met my own parents, it was with perhaps more of interest, yet always with a demeanor I would have shown to any strangers who noticed me. My own father and mother had other children, 10 in all, the most of them being adopted into other chiefs' families, and although I knew that these were my own brothers and sisters, yet we met throughout my younger life as though we had not known our common parentage. This was, and indeed is, in accordance with Hawaiian customs. It is not easy to explain its origin to those alien to our national life, but it seems perfectly natural to us. As intelligible a reason as can be given is that this alliance by adoption cemented the ties of friendship between the chiefs. It spread to the common people, and it has doubtless fostered a community of interest and harmony. At the age of 4 years I was sent to what was then known as the Royal School, because its pupils were exclusively persons whose claims to the throne were acknowledged. It was founded and conducted by Mr. Amos S. Cook, who was assisted by his wife. It was a boarding school, the pupils being allowed to return to their homes during vacation time, as well as for an occasional Sunday during the term. The family life was made agreeable to us, and our instructors were especially particular to teach us the proper use of the English language. But when I recall the instances in which we were sent hungry to bed, it seems to me that they failed to remember that we were growing children. A thick slice of bread covered with molasses was usually the sole article of our supper, and we were sometimes ingenious, if not over-honest, in our search for food. If we could beg something of the cook, it was the easier way, but if not, anything eatable left within our reach was surely confiscated. As a last resort, we were not above searching the gardens for any esculent root or leaf, which, having inherited the art of igniting a fire from the friction of sticks, we could cook and consume without the knowledge of our preceptors. I can remember now my emotions on entering this, the first school I ever attended. I can recall that I was carried there on the shoulders of a tall, stout, very large woman, whose name was Kaikai. She was the sister of Governor Kanoa, and they were of a family of chiefs of inferior rank, living under the control and direction of the higher chiefs. As she put me down at the entrance to the schoolhouse, I shrank from its doors, with that immediate and strange dread of the unknown so common to childhood. Crying bitterly, I turned to my faithful attendant, clasping her with my arms and clinging closely to her neck. She tenderly expostulated with me, and as the children, moved by curiosity to meet the newcomer, crowded about me, I was soon attracted by their friendly faces, and was induced to go into the old courtyard with them. Then my fears began to vanish, and, comforted and consoled, I soon found myself at home amongst my playmates. Several of the pupils who were at school with me have subsequently become known in Hawaiian history. There were 4 children of Kina'u, daughter of Kamehameha I, the highest in rank of any of the women chiefs of her day. Those were Moses, Lot, afterwards Kamehameha V, Liholiho, afterwards Kamehameha IV, and Victoria, of whom I shall soon speak. Next came Lunalilo, who followed Kamehameha V as king. Then came Bernice Pauahi, who married the Honorable Charles R. Bishop. Our family was represented by Liliuokalani, Kalakaua, and myself, 2 of the 3 destined to ascend the throne. Besides these, I must mention Emma Rook, who married one of the Kamehamehas, Peter Ka'eo, Jane Loau, Elizabeth Kaaniao, Abigail Maheha, Mary Paaina, and John Kina'u Pitt, although these were all not there at the same time. Queen Emma, I remember, did not come in until after I had been at school some years. We never failed to go to church in a procession every Sunday in charge of our teachers, Mr. and Mrs. Cook, and occupied seats in the immediate vicinity of the pew where the king was seated. The custom was for a boy and girl to march side by side, the lead being taken by the eldest scholars. Moses and Jane had this distinction, next Lot and Bernice, then Liholiho with Abigail, followed by Lunalilo and Emma, after the latter had joined the school, James and Elizabeth, David and Victoria, and so on, John Kina'u and I being the last. With the Princess Victoria, who died on the 29th of May, 1866, my younger life was connected in the following manner. When I was taken from my own parents and adopted by Paki and Konya, or about 2 months thereafter, a child was born to Kina'u. That little babe was the Princess Victoria, 2 of whose brothers became sovereigns of the Hawaiian people. While the infant was at its mother's breast, Kina'u always preferred to take me into her arms to nurse, and would hand her own child to the woman attendant who was there for that purpose. So she frequently declared in the presence of my adopted mother, Konya, that a bond of the closest friendship must always exist between her own baby girl and myself as aikane, or foster children of the same mother, and that all she had would also appertain to me just as if I had been her own child, and that although in the future I might be her child's rival, yet whatever would belong to Victoria should be mine. This insistence on the part of the mother was never forgotten. It remained in the history of Victoria's girlhood and mine until her death, although Kina'u herself never lived to see her prophetic predictions fulfilled. Kina'u died on the 4th of April, 1839, not long after the birth of her youngest child, Victoria. On any occasion where the Princess Victoria was expected to be present, I was always included in the invitation, so that whenever Kekaulohi, the sister of Kina'u, invited her niece to be with her, I was also summoned to her residence. This aunt lived in a large stone house called Pohukaina, which stood not more than 200 feet from the royal school, and for our enjoyment she used to prepare all sorts of sweetmeats and delicacies peculiar to the Hawaiians, such as, to call them by our native names, kulolo, paipai, and koele palau, with which our childish tastes were delighted. In 1847, Moses left school and went to reside with his father. In 1848, Jane Loau married a Mr. Jasper. Abigail Maheha also left about the same time to reside with her aunt, the Princess Kekauonohi, and it was at this date that the epidemic of measles spread through the land. Of those who fell victims to it were Moses Kekuaiwa, William Pitt Leleohoku, who was a cousin of the Princess Kekauonohi, and first husband of the Princess Ruth. When later my younger brother was born and adopted by Ruth, he took the name of her deceased husband. The third of these deaths in the families of the royal children was that of my little sister, Ka'imina, who had been adopted by Kamehameha III and his queen Kalama. This sad event made a great impression upon my younger days, for these relatives and companions of my youth died and were buried on the same day, the coffin of the last named resting on that of the others. They were all buried in the royal mausoleum, which then was located where is now the yard of Iolani Palace. Since the erection of another building up the Nu'uano Valley, their remains have been removed with those of their ancestors. From the year 1848, the royal school began to decline in influence, and within 2 or 3 years from that time it was discontinued, the Cook family entering business with the Castles, forming a mercantile establishment still in existence. Mr. Cook and Mr. S.N. Castle were both sent to Honolulu by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. As soon as they had become accustomed to life in the Hawaiian Islands, they severed all connection with the board, entered secular and mercantile pursuits, founding the firm of Castle and Cook. This has now become a very wealthy concern, and although the senior partners are dead, it is still conducted under their name by their descendants or associates. The sons of Mr. Castle have also been actively interested in the present, 1893 to 1897, government of the Hawaiian Islands. From the school of Mr. and Mrs. Cook I was sent to that of Reverend Mr. Beckwith, also one of the American missionaries. This was a day school, and with it I was better satisfied than with a boarding school. Chapter 2. Some Incidents of My Youth. I was a studious girl, and the acquisition of knowledge has been a passion with me during my whole life, one which has not lost its charm to the present day. In this respect I was quite different from my sister Bernice. She was one of the most beautiful girls I ever saw. The vision of her loveliness at that time can never be effaced from remembrance. Like a striking picture once seen, it is stamped upon memory's page forever. She married in her 18th year. She was betrothed to Prince Lot, a grandchild of Kamehameha the Great, but when Mr. Charles R. Bishop pressed his suit, my sister smiled on him, and they were married. It was a happy marriage. When Mr. and Mrs. Bishop were first married, they established their modest home at the termination of the beautiful Nu'uanu Valley, directly opposite the tombs of the Hawaiian monarchs. They then began housekeeping in a small house on Alakea Street, near the site of the present Masonic Temple. At this time I was still living with Paki and Konya, and the house now standing and known as the Arlington Hotel was being erected by the chief for his residence. It was completed in 1851, and occupied by Paki until 1855, when he died. Then my sister and her husband moved to that residence, which still remained my home. It was there that the years of my girlhood were passed, after school days were over, and the pleasant company we often had in that house will never cease to give interest to the spot. Mr. Bishop was a popular and hospitable man, and his wife was as good as she was beautiful. The king, Kamehameha IV, Alexander Liholiho, would often appear informally at our doors with some of his friends. The evening would be passed in improvised dances, and the company always grew larger when it became known that we were thus enjoying ourselves. Sometimes we would all adjourn to the house of some friend or neighbor for whom we had reason to expect like hospitality, and the night would be half gone ere we noticed the flight of time. It was now that the young man who subsequently became my husband first became specially interested in me, and I in him, although we had been very near neighbors during our school days, and we had seen each other more than once. A Mr. and Mrs. Johnston, a married couple of rather advanced age, established a day school for children of both sexes in the house next to that of Mr. Cook. Their lot was separated from ours by a high fence of adobe, or sun-baked brick. The boys used to climb the fence on their side for the purpose of looking at the royal children, and amongst these curious urchins was John O'Dominus. His father was a sea captain, who had originally come to Honolulu on Cape Horn voyages, and had been interested in trade both in China and in California. The ancestors of Captain Dominus were from Italy, but Mrs. Dominus was an American, born at Boston, and was a descendant of one of the early English settlers. The house known as Washington Place was built by Captain Dominus for a family residence. As will appear shortly, Mr. Dominus was not my first or only suitor. My social and political importance would, quite apart from any personal qualities, render my alliance a matter of much solicitude to many. This is not, however, a subject on which I shall care to say more than is necessary. On June 13, 1855, Paki, my adopted father, died. Soon after this, the betrothal was announced of Alexander Liholiho and Emma Rook. Some of those interested in the genealogies of the historic families of the Hawaiian chiefs, on hearing of this intended marriage, went to the king and begged him to change his mind. "And why should I?" asked Liholiho. "Because, your majesty, there is no other chief equal to you in birth and rank but the adopted daughter of Paki." The king took offense at this counsel, and dismissed the objectors from his presence. Emma was descended from a half-brother of Kalani'opu'u, the latter being first cousin to Kamehameha the Great. The royal wedding took place on June 19, 1856. The bridesmaids were Princess Victoria, myself, and Mary Pittman. The groomsmen were Prince Lot, afterwards Kamehameha V, Prince William, and my brother, David Kalakaua. Honolulu was for the time the scene of great festivity. The ceremony filled the great Kauai Ha'o church, and thereafter there were picnics, parties, luau's, and balls without number. Each of the nations represented on the island, even to the Chinese, gave its own special ball in honor of the wedding.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?